Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to European Steel Day 2018, where the theme of our discussions is steel sustainability and low-carbon innovation. My name is Jackie Davis. I will have the privilege of moderating our discussions, and we're going to hear some visions, we're going to hear about some innovations, we're going to discuss some of the challenges relating to sustainability and low-carbon innovation, and very interactive sessions. We're going to discuss later with the policymakers what they need to do to enable that transition, and I will be coming out amongst you with the microphone for your questions later on during those sessions. One housekeeping note before we start. If you do want to ask a question, I'm going to ask you to do it in the old-fashioned way by raising your hand. But if you want to tweet to the outside world about what you're hearing, and we hope you will be inspired to do so, the Twitter hashtag is ESD2018. So now, without further ado, to formally welcome you and launch proceedings, it is my great pleasure to give the floor to Geert van Poelvoorde, President of EUROFER. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's a bit a strange upset here today. So, good. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I think, first of all, very welcome that you are here in our 2018 Steel Day. We just finalized the press conference, and I told them that steel is never going to get boring, because we thought last year that we were a bit out of the problems. Now we are back completely in the problems. So we will discuss it further this afternoon, and I think it was good to have a view on the journalists, because they were not completely up to speed, I would say, on our steel topics. So this afternoon we're going to, so the sustainability and the low carbon innovation is at the end the theme of the conference, so we're going to concentrate on this. And you know that the steel industry is at the forefront of innovation in the world. Our technologies, our products are at the forefront of what we see in the steel industry. The environmental legislation is the most stringent in the world. I don't think I have to explain this to you, and it is not stopping, it's going on, and with what we have in front of us is becoming even, I would say, more severe or worse, whatever you like as a word, but it's becoming to be more challenging even the next years to come. We will see this, and we will hear this afternoon what we can do to tackle this. Of course, R&D will be a huge topic to tackle all of this. This environmental legislation, the environmental progress, we will not stop. We have to work on this, and there one of the big topics is R&D. So EUROFER has defined the last year a discussion paper slash master plan how to do this and what to do, and we will see more of this afternoon. And there are two important topics there. And the one is smart carbon usage. This is just using the carbon created during the steel production process in the best possible way. And the second is carbon direct avoidance. So this is the simplest one, is avoiding that you have carbon in the beginning in the steel industry production. Now, one of the main topics which is coming up more and more is using the renewable energy and the hydrogen-based metallurgy. So this is possible. This is working in small projects in a lab, I would say. Now, upscaling is a bit more tricky and will cost a lot of money. And both pathways, the carbon avoidance and carbon usage, will contribute to the circular economy and to improve our footprint of our environmental footprint. Now, we have seen that, or we have discussed that those things need a lot of investments, and the first calculations show that to reach this, when we would take those technologies that are available, that are working on a small scale, we would bring them to a big scale, high scale, upscaling them. We would talk about 10 billion euro investments the next 10 to 15 years. So it is clear that 10 billion euro is impossible to pay from private steel industry when to do this, only to have the environmental legislation followed. So there is funding needed for this, and it is good that we have this now so-called 9th framework program. I see that a lot of Commission people are here present. We're going to explain this afternoon exactly what we're going to do with the money. So I understood that there is already part of the money reserved for us. Maybe we will get some more after today. But this is absolutely necessary, so the policymakers should be clear, and the Commission be clear that without funding this will not work. This public-private joint approach is absolutely necessary to do this. Now, also important is that when you talk about, for example, hydrogen steelmaking, base steelmaking, when you calculate then, and this is also done in this discussion document, when you would convert the whole steel industry in Europe, you would find that you need 500 terawatt hours electricity more. Our steel industry is using now between 70 and 80 per year. Of course, you have to produce this with renewable energies. When you produce this with coal-fired power plants, it will not be very helpful. So this is something which is absolutely needed, so you have to start today. You cannot do this when all the steel companies have done their research and have found the right projects. When you then have to build your 500 terawatt, by the way, we heard from Axel, this is the same level as the German consumption. So I don't think you build this in a very short time. Now, to do all of this, we need, and this is one of the topics I think is the most critical one, and I think, Jackie, we will have to discuss a few times this afternoon. The topic which is not solved is that when you do all of this funding, research, you find the good results, and you implement this, that when you're not protected on the borders against companies that do not have to do this, do not do this, use their money to do something else, meaning product improvement, process improvements, product development, then we are not in a level playing field anymore. So you can only spend €1 once. So when you spend it to do environmental improvement projects, and you have seen the euros will be very high, then you cannot spend it for something else. So we need this stability, so we need this protection against imports of steel in the future that do not have this environmental pressure and are keep on producing with an environmental footprint which is very far above what we used to do and what we will do in the future in Europe. And of course, when we talk about this protection, this brings me to the hottest topic of the moment, is Section 232. So it is clear that the steel industry is condemning this, I would say, Trump tariff, since it is, first of all, is protection, it is, which is not beneficial for the whole global trade. But it is also not fair, and it is producing problems that are not necessary to produce. Let me remind you that US is importing 35 million tons of steel. Europe is importing 40 million tons of steel. So when US is closing its borders, there is a US calculation saying we will not close the borders completely because Brazil has a 70% quota, South Korea has 70% quota. So there will be more or less 37% blocked. 37% is meaning that 30 million tons will be deflected. Now, the importers in US and the importers in Europe are the same importers. When I take the example of Brazil, when Brazil has imported their 100% production to US, now it is 70%, 30%, they will just put it in the flows into Europe. So we will be confronted, when we don't solve this, with 13 million ton additional steel floating into Europe. And we have seen this is already happening because the imports increased first quarter of 2018 with 8% again, which is not a low number. This is annualized, it's 15%. So now, of course, it is vital that Europe acts against this, and we fully support what the European Commission is doing. They have the three-way approach. First is the rebalancing. So, okay, this is good to show the muscles to US, but the steel industry will not have much more benefit when there is whiskey or Harley-Davidson of Europe and Europe becoming more expensive, but this is good to have the, let's say, the discussion with the US. The safeguarding is, of course, the most important one, and the third one is what the Commission is doing is complaining to the WTO, because what Europe is doing has to be compliant with WTO rules. We want to be and we want to remain in the global trade systems. So this is good, and we hope that the safeguarding will come fast. So we had this morning a meeting with Mrs. Malmström, and she promised that at the beginning of July, normally, we should have the provisional measures on safeguarding. Of course, the discussion has to go on, because the question is always, what will then be the measure? It has to work, of course. There should not be country exclusions, should not be exclusions, it should work. Now, what is strange is that on this measure, that the real problem of the steel industry is the global overcapacity. And the global overcapacity is, you know, is 2/3 sitting in China, where there's still subsidized steel industry, still building up, by the way. Now, can you imagine what is now happening? The problem is the global steel overcapacity, of which 2/3 is in China. And as a consequence of this, two continents, two nations that are free fighter and the starting point of global free trade are at the edge of starting a trade war with each other because of the global overcapacity. This is absurd, you know. This is, for me, this sounds a bit surrealistic and also not very intelligent concept to solve this. So I think the most important thing remains solving the global overcapacity. So all forums, all meetings, when it is G7, G20, whatever, OECD, this has to be the problem. When this has to be discussed. When this is solved, then we will be able to also come away from this kind of very strange measures. So, but I think, Jackie, I will give over to you, because we should now first concentrate on low carbon and on sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Geert, and we will come back
Thank you.
on those very important issues that you raise in our discussion later on. So outlining there the key challenges that face the steel sector and the issues that you've highlighted that need to be addressed if you are to meet those challenges, but also to make the most of the opportunities that low-carbon innovation brings. And it's those opportunities, it's that vision of the future and what your industry is doing that we're going to turn to shortly. But as we start that conversation, first I'd like to take us on a little journey. Just zoom forward in your minds to the year 2050 and it's European Steel Day. Let's have a look at what it might look like.
We've done it. It's been long and challenging, but we managed to significantly reduce our impact on the climate. It took some time. Back in the late 2010s, we were stretching what was possible. Steelmaking was at its thermodynamic limits. Thankfully, our industry joined forces with government and invested in deploying breakthrough technologies. As a result, we were able to drastically cut back on greenhouse gases. Between then and now, we're emitting up to 80% less. We scaled up technologies that reduce, recover, and recycle materials. All kinds of industries linked together in smarter ways than we could have ever imagined, with benefits for all. Carbon direct avoidance gave us the ability to use hydrogen and renewable electrical processes, making high-quality steel while avoiding CO2 emissions. Smart carbon usage put what little emissions remain to good use by making other products, such as useful chemicals. We understood even back then that change takes time and innovation. But most of all, it meant grasping breakthrough technologies and investing in them, even when facing the risk of failure. Because we mastered this, Europe now spearheads low-carbon steelmaking. Let's forge the future today.
So, Let's forge the future together. We're going to hear now from some captains of this industry who are working to forge that future. And let me bring them up onto the stage. And please do come up and join me as I introduce you. I am delighted to welcome Herbert Eibensteiner, who is head of the steel division at Wulst Alpine Group. Please, Herbert, why don't you come and join me here? Heinz-Jörg Fuhrmann, who is CEO of Salzgitter, a very warm welcome to you. Andreas Gosch, who is CEO of ThyssenKrupp Steel Europe. Welcome to you, Andreas. Why don't you come here? And last but not least, Martin Pei, Chief Technology Officer at SSAB, who's going to talk to us about the hybrid project. A very warm welcome, Martin, to you as well. So make yourselves comfortable in we're here talking about innovation, so we thought we'd bring you a rather innovative setting. I have asked our CEOs, our captains of industry, to talk to us about their visions of the future. We saw the video, what are their visions, and to give us some examples of what they are doing, what their companies are doing to realize that vision. So Herbert, would you kick us off, please? And then after that, I have some questions for them, and we'll hopefully have time if you have a burning question for them as well. But Herbert, get us started.
Yeah, thank you. You have seen the vision of the steel industry. Maybe in 2050, and this is a wishful thinking, that we are still globally competitive. You know, Europe is, I think, the most competitive steel market in the world, and I think we will still produce innovative steel products. You know, I'm still in wishful thinking. And we do that with very clean processes. You know, this is fueled by this reliable, renewable energy flow, which comes from, you know, I'm not sure what I should say. When we talk about 500 terawatt hours, which is a huge figure. And it's so simple. Yeah? We think we can survive by getting everything we ask for. And I have forgotten the word affordable. Yeah? Affordable energy, and I think this is the key. And the reality is, at the moment, it's different. You know, and I think it's clear that we fully committed, and the presentation of Axel Eckert have shown this, that we have a lot of projects, and we are fully committed to do our work to achieve these goals. But what we expect, and I think this is decisive, that this transformation towards this low-carbon economy requires really a fundamental transformation of the entire energy system in Europe. And it's not only towards renewables. We have to have grids available which are stable. We have to store energy, and you know, the wind is not always blowing and the sun is not always shining. And I think this will be decisive, and it's also a time issue when we talk about additional 500 terawatts, and you know, we have colleagues from other energy intensive sectors which have even higher demands. So it's also a time issue, and to be honest, we have ideas, and but the economically feasible breakthrough technology is it's in the tryout phase and in the R&D phase so far. I can say what voestalpine is doing in this context. we discussed a lot, and at the end we come to the conclusion that our path is in CDA to try to avoid CO2 emissions in the first place. And we have two concepts, a more short-term concept that we have recently initiated a EU-supported flagship project, H2 Future, which is a demonstration project or an R&D project together with Siemens and Verbund, which is a energy supplier, and others. And we have put this plant, and this is a electrolyzer, which the biggest electrolyzer, I think, at the moment, and has a capacity of 1,200 cubic meter per hour, which is the biggest at the moment, the biggest single electrolyzer. When you think 1,300 cubic meter, and we have HBI plant in Texas with 2 million tons HBI, and the necessary capacity of, and this is iron crude steel. This would be 200,000 cubic meter per hour. So it's quite an upscaling, and this is for 2 million tons, my company produced 6 million tons, you can, with this easy calculation, and when you times, 150 million tons in Europe, this is quite a figure. It's complicated, and we will see what the efficiency of such a project is. We think it's very efficient. We will do R&D work on the reliability and the safety of such a process, and this is one thing. And I'm not too long. The second thing is a more long-term project, and this is SuSteel. Is very interesting. This is the idea to transform iron ore directly by using hydrogen plasma into crude steel, and this is a long-term R&D project. This is, you can imagine, this is now in a scale of a water glass. And now the big upscaling effort we do at the moment is 20 kilo for the next 5 years to see how it will work. This is really basic R&D, and this is the focus is 2050. It's not 2030, 2025, it's 2050. I think this is one example how such a vision we heard today or before may become reality.
Thank you very much indeed. So as you say, there are those shorter term projects, those longer, but that point you make about economic feasibility of these breakthrough technologies, which links very much to the point Geert made earlier about the investments that are required and the partnerships required to deliver these things. We'll come back on what you need to turn these things into reality a little bit later. But Heinz-Jörg Fuhrmann from Salzgitter, your opening thoughts, please. And the slide should come up, in theory, when you click. She said optimistically. Do we have the first slide of Mr. Fuhrmann, please? We have the technology. No. Yes, there we are. That's the one. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Ms. Davis. First of all, I would like to state that efforts and concepts of each company presented here and also outside this panel, I believe, deserves respect and appreciation. Nevertheless, they are different, what is, as far as I believe, very natural, taking into account different corporate politics and strategies, as well as different national frameworks, even within Europe. 95% of all primary steel worldwide is produced via the integrated blast furnace-based route. There are important reasons for that. and Mr. Eibensteiner has also mentioned, some of that reasons are, if you like it or not, cost, energy efficiency, and scalability. But this route comes along with high carbon dioxide output because carbon-based, as we know. Salzgitter has 3 targets. First of all, staying alive in spite of sharply decreasing free carbon dioxide allowances in the European Union. Secondly, staying not only alive, but also staying in Europe. And thirdly, changing from carbon-based to hydrogen-based steelmaking. Our concept is named Salzgitter Low Carbon Dioxide Steelmaking, in brief, SALCOS. We want to implement it in large scale as soon as possible. That preserves as much as possible of the existing 5 million tons per annum mill we operate in Salzgitter. And it will be implemented modular in 5 steps, arriving at a 25% reduction in only a few years. And finally, with a potential of up to 95% reduction in 2050. The technology we need is partially based on existing components, such as natural gas-based direct reduction and the electric arc furnace, but necessarily with innovative components like direct reduction with high and flexible amounts of hydrogen. Hydrogen is to be produced via electricity from renewable resources, especially offshore wind energy, which is generated not too far from us, not leaving the border of our federal state in Germany. The SALCOS concept is a realistic possibility to promote the so-called industrial sector coupling. With the DRI, the direct reduced iron, produced via hydrogen as an intermediate energy reservoir. Of course, we have to benchmark our SALCOS concept against ideas to reduce carbon dioxide in other sectors, like mobility and chemistry. And the result is that SALCOS needs, although being expensive, as explained also by Mr. van Poelvoorde right at the beginning, it needs comparably low investment cost per ton of carbon dioxide avoided. And also extremely important, I have to state that SALCOS provides the highest carbon dioxide reduction potential per megawatt hour electrical power, if we compare it to ideas from other sectors. Hence, we are ready to start in big scale. The first stages can operate beginning 2021. This has to be accompanied by thorough R&D. For the purpose, we have joined forces with Fraunhofer, Europe's largest R&D organization. Following our guideline, the best carbon dioxide is a carbon dioxide which is never produced. Therefore, carbon direct avoidance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, and that emphasis on avoidance again, so central. Thank you for that, and good to hear where you are in that process and where you hope to get to. Andreas Goss from ThyssenKrupp Steel Europe, please, your opening thoughts, your vision and what you're doing.
Yeah, as Gert has pointed out already, I think, as they say, the future isn't what it used to be, and that's especially true for the steel industry, where our challenges really change from year to year, and they range from bare survival, as has been pointed out, under cost pressure, to the pressure to actually change our entire technology over a very short period of time if you want to be in business sustainably in 2050 or thereafter. But if you look at the big picture, actually, I mean, we have to reiterate it. It has been said the European steel industry is, because we understand the necessity, fully committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and to contributing to the achievement of the objectives of the Paris Treaty. That is certainly our wish. That's what we want to do, but we also have the responsibility to point out things that are hard to overcome. And it actually has been said today numerous times, directly and indirectly, things like the hydrogen production, the actual usage of electricity, which is enormous, and the fact that we need to actually, at this point in time already, create these energy possibilities in order to be able to industrialize all our projects. The other goal, and that's the only goal our industry has, is to serve our customers, of course. And steel is, we all know that, part of a very, very important value chains, be it a car, a production machine, a can of food, whatever. And this means that we also need to understand the needs and desires of our customers in the future. We need to anticipate that, as well as all the mega trends that we saw, the big markets, societies, mobility, urban living, you all know that, environmental impact, climate change, all the rest of that. So our development of new steel needs to address all these things, these trends, and is, of course, has to be focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Otherwise, we will not be existing in due time. But at the moment, and we all know that our industry, of course, operates very much to the physical limits of the blast furnace route. There's not too much we can do, actually, to reduce CO2, so we have to go fundamentally new ways. And we all have heard the two buzzwords for 2050 today, and we'll hear them again, low carbon economy and, of course, circular economy, but the economy has always been circular, it just is now pointed out. So the projects that we show today as part of the big scale initiative put us a challenge in front of us which we haven't mastered yet. In a very competitive market, we actually have to work together amongst each other, which we're not used to. We don't even know how to do this because we're fiercely competing in the markets. And we need to work across other industries, so not just our industry, to be able to have the technological solutions for the future. The two routes are clear. We have, it's been pointed out by Hans-Jörg, CDA, so avoidance. It's the best carbon that exists. It's the one that CO2 that's never emitted. And nevertheless, of course, usage of CO2, because there will always be some emission of CO2, and to use that and to extend the usage of it is also very important. It will be most likely a mix of both methods, so it's not just CDA or just the other, but we need to take into account all technological solutions for the reduction of CO2. As far as ThyssenKrupp is concerned, we do both. We, of course, have, like our competitors, clear plans to use hydrogen to avoid CO2 emissions by using a different reduction element. But we also have a project which is pretty much in focus and which I want to present today, which is called Carbon to Chem, which is, of course, a usage project where we use the waste gases that we produce in large quantities and which we currently only convert into electricity or flare them for lack of a better use. And we want to put them to use in the chemical industry. We want to use the gases, including the carbon-containing components, as a raw material for the production of basic chemicals. And of course, this would replace the production of synthesis gas from carbon compounds such as oil or natural gas. And that, of course, is some sort of indirect avoidance as well. So this is a very novel approach. And the very novel is also that we have a total cross-industry approach in a region. And in addition to the chemical and steel industries, we have a number of other industries, science institutes and so on, to work with us. So what we do here is actually our contribution to make sure that the German energy transition and also the reduction of CO2 emissions works. And our center has been recently opened. We will have an official opening soon. And the investment of all of that is in excess of 100 million. So there is not one way. There is not one way. We know that the investment will have to be billions and billions in order to do that. And lastly, which seems to be forgotten at times in the discussion, which I often think of, is climate change needs to be anchored globally. So if we kill each other or ourselves in reduction of 100 or 200 million tons of CO2 in Germany, that will not solve the problem if other nations that emit 5.3 billion tons of CO2 a year, such as the US, take the entire problem of their agenda. So I think we should strive for technology, but we can't do it alone. And the most important thing is that these things proliferate throughout the world, because we will certainly not make it ourselves.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And as you say, we come back again. I was very struck by what you said about we aren't used to it, but we need to work together because otherwise we cannot meet this challenge.
I said we're not used to it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said.
Oh,
yeah. So question, perhaps it'd be interesting to know what the rest of you think of that. But Martin, complete the picture for us, will you? Tell us about HYBRIT and your vision.
Oh, yes. As the rest of the steel industry, SSAB has been working in a very long time in improving our processes. We did a significant step back already in 1987, where we shut down our sinter plant and turned into 100% pellets charge in our blast furnace in Luleå. And since then, that blast furnace has been among one of the best in terms of CO2 emission. We gradually also changed the production setup in our other mills in Sweden and Finland. So right now we are really operating close to the theoretical limit. Yeah. So to further reduce CO2 emission, the only option is to develop a breakthrough technology. So that is where the HYBRIT project came into the picture. We, together with LKB and Vattenfall, conducted a pre-feasibility study, which we finished in the beginning of this year. We came out with a conclusion that at the current cost conditions, which was in the beginning of this year with coal price, electricity price, and also CO2 emission rights cost, our assessment was that to set up a hybrid production route in northern Sweden will cost us approximately 20 to 30% more than what our cost is today. So that is a very encouraging conclusion. What is also interesting for Sweden and also in northern Finland is that we have already in Sweden a fossil-free electricity system with an excess of production corresponding to about 15 terawatt hours per year, which is corresponding approximately the energy we need if we convert our current production in Sweden. So this gave us a lot of confidence. We have together also created a joint venture company with the 3 partners, HYBRIT Development AB. And our plan is that we are going to build a pilot plant facility designed for about 1 ton per hour of DRI that we are going to make the groundbreaking ceremony on 20th of June now. And this is going to be a very exciting step of development. I think we all know that hydrogen as a reductant for iron ore reduction works in laboratory. It works quite well, but we need to test it at a larger scale. And this is going to be one of the major steps in this technical development. So we need to put in this money and invest in this research work. So our plan is that we will build this facility in the coming 2 years, hopefully during 2020. This will be ready for test campaigns. And we have planned for about 5 years of tests in this facility to fine-tune the technology setup, various technical solutions. Probably we will need to change quite a lot in different combinations of technologies. And during 2024, our plan is that we will make a next decision. If this really flies, then we will go into a demonstration phase.
So, a question really to you all. You are looking, as you say, it's 2024 before you know whether it's going to fly. And you've all talked about the level of investment that is required to do all of this. In terms of the business case, and you are an industry facing numerous challenges at the moment, and Geert spelled them out very clearly, and he was saying, you can only spend every euro once. What are for you all are the essential ingredients that make the business case for investing in the sort of projects you've been telling us about? What do you need, and do you have those ingredients now? Thought from you all on that.
Well,
Andreas.
A quick reason is simply the bare necessity in terms of cost. If the element of CO2 is as costly priced in our business model as we now foresee it, I think the question is answered. If we don't avoid that somehow and be able to reduce it, we will die from it. It's a poison that will kill us.
Yeah.
I think it's not a surprise that I have exactly the same opinion. First of all, we have to keep competitive, and to avoid any misunderstanding, not only competitive within Europe. That might be a little bit easier if everybody gets imposed the same extra load within Europe, but we operate in a world market, and therefore we cannot abstain ourselves from what is going on in the rest of the world. Therefore, we are all stock-listed companies sitting here with shareholders who can, in an extreme case, run away, and invest in other industries or in steel companies abroad. So, serving our customers with the best possible material for a competitive price is an essential going forward, and therefore we need some framework which is reliable, which has a certain respect for our need to be competitive, and then I think everybody of us has shown, having in mind the strategy and the special situation of his own company, we are all ready to proceed.
It's all about energy price. This is OPEX.
Something seems to have gone. Yeah, let's swap. Thank you, Charles.
Operational costs is the key of such a project. We talk a lot about capital expenditure. Okay, this is we talk about billions of euro, but it's
hissing. No. I know we have a problem with the hiss. Why don't you try? I don't know whether it's the mic or quite what is happening. Try that one. Try that one. There we go. That's hiss has gone. Yep.
Okay. So I have to start from the beginning. It's everybody about operational costs. No?
Yeah.
And operational costs is energy costs. You have to be, you have to have cheap, sustainable energy. That's the key. Okay, this is OPEX, but we have also the necessity to and this is positive at the moment, and we appreciate that we have support in our R&D efforts so far. But in addition, we have to spend a lot of capital expenditure as well.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, in relation to that support for your R&D efforts, and Geert mentioned at the beginning the importance. You said we can't do this alone. We need the help, and we have a new EU funding programme in the pipeline now. In terms of where public money is most useful to you, where should it be focused? Is it because you need to work together and you're not used to? Is it on those pre-competitive issues? Where is it most helpful for EU money, national R&D money to be put?
Yeah, to be very clear and very honest, of course R&D is also expensive. but much more expensive in our case is the real hardware. And therefore, I don't hide to say, if we get some help for R&D, it's valuable, but this does not solve, all the hurdles to see something in reality. And I think this must be the final target of everybody, especially of the policy in Europe, not to fund only R&D and to see nice concepts, to see a lot of brochures and good slides and so on, but to see finally, and not too late, not in 2050 and not in 2080, something in reality and in a large industrial scale. And that, to be very clear, does not need, especially for a stock-listed company, only some help in R&D. That needs some more.
Okay. Martin, you wanted to come in?
I would like to bring up the aspect of this enormous transformation of society that we are aiming at. If we want to become fossil-free, as Sweden has decided to become a fossil-free nation in 2045, that means that the whole society needs to support the journey. Just take an example, Sweden has a tremendous good electricity system already today, but it's not enough, since the whole nation is going to be electrified, and that is going to need a lot of new renewable energies, new power transmission lines, which everybody, a private person, can put a stop on, and that we really need to get support from not only, I think, R&D money is really good. We can work on with the technology development, but we need also to have long-term plans for transforming the whole society.
Yeah. So that fundamental transformation that you've all appealed for, we need both. Andreas, good.
Coming back to your initial question, what's the best allocation and the best usage? And you pointed out whether the EU could help us in that context. Work together. I think that's not a question of capital allocation. That is actually saving capital. If they showed us a way, which for us is rather tricky really in practical terms, to work on these big scale projects with each other as far as that is feasible. Not everything is feasible because they don't overlap fully. But if they showed us that way without us being with one foot in jail, as we say in German, then we would of course save money because some of the parallel activities would not squander monies. So that would be efficient to do that. I repeat that once we leave this room, we all understand pretty much what we all do, but we all do it strictly in silos. And we do not know anything about each other, and that is good and safe for us, you know. So if that should change, then I think there should be an initiative to really make sure that the industry is actually, to a certain point, allowed to do that, because currently maybe my colleagues, but I certainly don't see a way to intensively cooperate on an R&D scale with Salzgitter,
without coming into
which I would love to, but it's not possible. Yeah.
Risk of breaching some rules. A comment to this point about working together, please.
I think it's Mr. Goss is true, because your question goes about in the direction what are the costs and what do you expect and so on. As soon as we come into what does this cost and what is a feasible or a feasibility, we have to discuss costs, we have to discuss the capital expenditure, we have to discuss volumes and so on. Everything is not allowed. So we can. It's impossible to share anything about.
But would you agree that it is essential to find a way to do so?
I don't see any.
Yes, as far as we can. I think simply the fact that we four are sitting here is a clear signal of our willingness, not only to discuss but also to cooperate, But we have to be clear and honest, even today. And we have to state, like my two colleagues did, there are some limitations because of, say, conceptual differences, which are not only differences because of different, say, scientific interpretations, but also because of different situations of the respective company. And in addition, we have to strictly obey limits of cooperation of competitors. And therefore, not everything which seems to be desirable, maybe from a more political point of view, has a chance to be done really in reality.
Just to give you a quick example, a very quick example, Hans-Jürgen and I, we have a very successful cooperation since long as companies in production. If we want to discuss issues, we have to have a witness present, preferably a compliance lawyer. We can't just sit down and chat, it's not that easy. So
a key issue to look at. But Martin, we're talking about cooperation within the steel sector. You, as you've explained through the hybrid project, are working with the other parts of the chain. How important do you think that is going to be for everybody in terms of making sure we realize the full potential of these breakthroughs if they do come to pass?
Yes, I think in the hybrid situation is quite unique, since we have a very advanced mining industry in northern Sweden, and we have tremendous good power supply situation, and the technology investment that Vattenfall is doing in hydrogen area, for example, and with SSAB. So we have completed the value chain between energy, mining, and steel, which is rather unique. So I think we need to look at local conditions. We are in different areas having different limitations, and it happened to be that in northern Sweden and northern Europe we have a unique situation. So that I think if we set up this test facility, of course this facility can be used for many different tests, running different type of iron ores, different conditions and so on. So I believe that there will be, at least in the future, possible cooperation opportunities. But we need to think about how to do it, and I hope that we will find a good solution for that.
Okay, if we could have the lights up a little bit and see if there are any questions from our audience. Does anybody have a question or a comment to what you are hearing from our captains of industry? Anybody? I'm just having a little look. I have to walk around in this wonderful setting. Anybody want to join our discussion at this point? Okay, and could you please, I know you all know each other, but for my sake, please introduce yourself.
My name is Volker Hille from Salzgitter AG, and I have a little comment because this figure has been presented several times during the speeches before. We have heard that this CDA approach would need something about 500 terawatt-hours, which I think is something which might be a little bit high, but maybe true for 100% hydrogen operation. But for 100% hydrogen operation, you don't get about 80% CO2 reduction, you already get about 95%. So what I want to say is, if you target 80% CO2 reduction, you get along with half of the needed energy supplied via electrolytic hydrogen, and half of the energy still being supplied by natural gas, meaning that you end up with about 260 terawatt-hours for an 80% reduction in CO2, because you still can operate on natural gas. This is one comment. And then I have a question to Mr. Pai, because I appreciate very much your approach, and I follow your argumentation. One question: why are you targeting a newly developed shaft furnace DRI process, where other processes are already existing, which, as far as the experts say, are being operable at any level of hydrogen?
Thank you. It's very specific, so let's take that straight away. Thank you.
Oh yes, in the hybrid project, we are going to test the reduction process using 100% of hydrogen reduction gas. Of course, we will start with what has been done in process based on nitrogen. So we will not create the whole process from scratch. What we would like to do is that we will shift and see what happens if the process works, and then how we can scale it up. So we are not inventing a complete new process.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Very quickly, I want to point out the question of the gentleman was the first question with regard, or actually the information that we only need half of what's been said in terms of terawatt hours, goes to show somewhat of the irrationality of the discussion, you know, because what he says, and it's perfectly right, is we only need to create in parallel half the energy that Germany consumes in parallel, you know, to do that. So it's easy, I suppose, to do that, you know, being ironic. And this is the type of dimension we're dealing with here, you know. It reminds me of an old movie where a scientist says if you stay 95 years in the bunker, then you survive all of that, you know. Now we say we only have to stay 50 years in the bunker, you know, which makes it no better. The problem is we're dealing with dimensions here which are simply not really feasible in industrial terms, nor in fiscal terms.
So, yeah, please.
Yeah. On the one hand, we want to substitute, in essence, an aggregate, the blast furnace, which is a undisputed technology. 95% of the primary iron is produced in the blast furnace worldwide, and there have been for more than 100 years attempts to substitute the blast furnace, and nobody was really successful. That is the one thing, and on the same side we know that if these CO2 reduction targets will become reality, and we all know they become reality in the European Union, and we still want to have a steel production here, we have to make really a major change. And it is so easy to talk about visions and breakthrough technologies, and it seems so, especially if you are not an engineer like I am, yeah, that it is only something you can do within a second, yeah, from existing technology to breakthrough. Yeah, it is only something which depends on your willingness and nothing else. No, it is a big step forward, but I say either, because the politics will not change, yeah, either we make this systematic approach, mentioned also by my colleagues, which is not only limited to the steel industry, but to the whole society and to the whole economy, or we make it not. And it seems to me, because we have chosen the politics, which has decided that we have only the possibility, at least to try to do it and to develop realistic concepts to go ahead with that. And therefore it is so urgent and so demanding at the same time to see how this can be organized, how this can be harmonized and orchestrated, so that really the growth in renewable energy generation, yeah, is enough to cover the needs of a industry, which not only steel industry, which goes away from being carbon oriented to more and more electricity oriented. No other alternative.
But as you say, this is about not just your sector, but Herbert, you made the point at the beginning about that fundamental transformation in the energy system. Did you want to react? Martin wanted to come in, but I just want to give Herbert a chance. You want to comment on?
The fundamental change will not change. This is the problem, and I think we are so far away. Really, to be honest, and it's. I think it doesn't matter if it's 250 terawatt hours or 500 or 400. We are so far away, and we need so many time to implement this huge figure of energy, and you know, thinking of how difficult it is for politicians to implement or to build grids, it lasts years and years to get a permission to build grids because, you know, to find a frog here and a frog there and you know, all the environmental regulations. So it's when we stick to our rules, it will be impossible to get these grids and to get this power. And I think you have to take really a big effort to start immediately.
Hence your comment about it may just be wishful thinking. If we don't start now, then that's all it will be. Martin, you wanted to come in?
Yes, I want to mention, I agree that this transformation really needs to start now and happen very fast. The permission to build out further capacity of renewable energy, also the grid, is taking time, and we need to push that. I want to just bring up one aspect also, is that our vision, of course, in the hybrid project is to replace coal with, in principle, electricity, renewable electricity in the long run. And that is a huge challenge. This is not going to happen in a very short time. That's why we have a quite in our eyes, very aggressive time schedule. In many other people's eyes, too slow. We understand the wish to go it faster, but this will take time to develop the technology, because this is really a huge step change if we manage with this. And we need to do that in a structured way instead of running too fast. We know what will happen if we run too fast.
Okay, quick one if you would.
Yeah, very quick. May I remind everyone that we are dreaming a wonderful dream, which I fully support, but even if we did away with all the emissions CO2 in the EU, we'd solve maximum of 2% of the problem worldwide. So unless as humanity we are able to first of all, develop the technology, secondly, politically anchor the technology, and thirdly, roll it out globally, we will not be able to solve the primary issue, which is climate change, because the climate is not just EU climate. I have to repeat that because sometimes we get a bit dreamy on the way of our 2% goal. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to try and draw some conclusions before we bring this fascinating discussion to an end. And I'm going to ask you, I think the priority, the overarching priority for you to be able to deliver is clear. There are many issues that we've discussed underneath it. But in terms of a key next step, you said we have to start now. So for each of you, the video ended with the phrase, let's forge the future together. If we are to make sure it is not wishful thinking, that it is a realistic ambition, what we saw there in the video, what for each of you, and I'll go the reverse way round to the opening statements, so Martin first, if you had to identify one key next step, one thing we need to do to enable you to deliver those innovations, to persist down this path, to deliver the breakthroughs that you've all said are essential because we're at the limit of what's possible with conventional, what is the key next step? Same question to all of you.
In our case, our key next step is to construct this pilot plant and test the technology, because we need to develop technology as a priority number one. With that, if that works, then the rest can help. If the technology doesn't work, doesn't help, we get a lot of other support from the society. So we have to make the technology a breakthrough. That's
and a key next step for policymakers to tackle all these issues that you're raising for this fundamental transformation?
Yes, I think the policy should support the long-term transformation of society away from fossil fuels, go more towards the renewable energy side, and that is a huge challenge.
Andreas, priority for you and a priority for policymakers?
Priority for me is very clear. I want to be kept alive as industry, as healthy and as long to be able to even start that transition. That's very simple, meaning that we need to be given the time and the means to do that, which at the moment it appears we will not be. So I'm pessimistic. As a policymaker, I would say, you know, if I was a commissioner for one day or whatever, I would come to the Steel Day and would vouch to all the CEOs and the people present to make sure that their industry will be guarded such that they will not be killed by external competitors who are not subjected to these climate change targets, and that we will make sure that this little small plant of a greener steel industry in Europe will be fostered and groomed and be kept safe.
Thank you, and we'll be hearing from the Commission Vice President a bit later on and from a leading MEP, so let's see if they make that commitment. Heinz-Jörg, your priority for you and for the policymakers?
My colleagues really already have mentioned what are my thoughts concerning this question, so I would like to add one sentence. I'm an optimist, and therefore, in spite of all difficulties and obstacles, I don't want to commit suicide because of being afraid of death.
Thank you very much indeed. So it is that risks, being able to take the risks, being enabled to take those risks. Is that what you mean?
Yes, risks can be taken, even big risks can be taken, if you have checked the situation thoroughly, and I see no alternative to do this within due time. And as mentioned by you, it needs a dense and a harmonious political framework. Otherwise, it will not go.
And I hope we'll be able to discuss those issues later on with our policymakers, and with here back on the stage a bit later on. Herbert, for you, a priority for yourself and for your company, and a key next step, a priority for the policymakers. Take Andreas, as if you were commissioner for a day, you've seized power here, you've switched hats, what would you do?
We have a clear strategy, we have a clear plan, what are the next steps with our projects. That's implemented, and this is planned. And as a CEO, we have the chance to make these clear plans and the clear schedules. At the politician has the opportunity to think in bigger scale, and I think it's should have an eye on the level playing field globally. I think this is decisive because it's more than in the past in the hands of the politician to keep us profitable and competitive. I think this is decisive, and this is why I invite politicians, and I agree with Andreas, we should really invite politicians to talk to the people in the steel industry, how they think of our problems.
Because it's that crucial question. We've heard about what you're doing, what you're innovating. We've heard about what you need to innovate. Crucial question, how do we keep that innovation in Europe, delivering growth and jobs for your companies and for Europe as a whole? And that, for you, the central issue that they must not lose sight of. Ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking our leaders for a very stimulating debate? Thank you very much to you all. You may get away from the very hot lights. Thank you so much for that. I'll just give you a moment to return to your seats. I'm loath to use the word. You'll see in your program, we described these initially, not knowing what the weather was going to be like today, as fireside chats. I can assure you we are not about to light fires and sit by them for our discussion. You'll be very relieved to hear, because particularly under these lights, it's already hot enough already. But we are going to do something a little bit different to perhaps the normal thing you see at conferences. I just want to have a couple of chats with people about some of these key issues we're talking about, and now broaden the debate to the wider sustainability challenge. So first, joining me for our non-fireside chat is Roger Staines, who is Director of Sustainability at Tata Steel Europe. Roger, please do come and join me here. And as I say, no fire. And there's some water, should you need it under the very heavy lights. We've been talking there, and we've been hearing about what companies are doing, the work they are doing on low-carbon innovation. Yeah. But of course, this is part of a broader challenge. How do you see that challenge? Give me a vision. We keep doing visions of 2050. What will a sustainable steel sector really look like in 2050?
Yeah, well, evidently addressing the climate change challenge, but there's at least 3 more challenges that we need to address to really sustain our business long term. And I think the other 3 key themes out there are around responsible sourcing. We are attending to that over the past 10, 15 years, but we see a recent renewal of attention to that. And that all has to do with the electrification of society. So society using much more exotic metals, people become aware where they origin from, lithium, cobalt, environmental issues, human rights issues, and you see legislation popping up in the UK, Anti-Slavery Act. In the Netherlands there's talks about importers required to declare that their materials are free of child labor. The conflict mineral, mandatory due diligence by Europe. So there's a lot of legislation being put in place recently, and as an industry you need to react and you need to ensure that you're credible and that your supply chain is free of those kinds of risks. The other thing which is important is circular economy. Now, we spoke about the CO2 aspect of that, but we also need to look beyond CO2 and recognize that we need to close the material loop and make sure that there's no value that gets lost in the usage of a resource. And evidently, steel has a great story to tell. All the steel you see around you has either been recycled or will be recycled. That's great, it's a permanent material, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that statement is valid for the coming 10 years, because we're still losing metallic coatings like nickel, zinc, and tin. And how do we preserve them? And we have alloyed steel. How do we ensure the functionality? So those are the first two, but I think the most important one that a sustainable business will have, and how it would manifest, is in its reputation. The reputation of steel and the reputation of the industry. A sustainable business has a great reputation, and that does not only require the performance, but it requires the acknowledgement of our stakeholders that that is true, and so we need to communicate.
I'm going to hear a bit about what your stakeholders think in a moment, but just comparing yourself to other materials. How do you think you are doing as an industry? You talked about that credibility challenge.
Yeah.
How are you doing compared with other materials such as cement and plastic and so on?
Well, the funny thing about reputation is that you only know that you have invested too little in it at the moment that you need one. And then look at plastics. I mean, the plastic soup debate is maybe, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years happening. And it seems to have accelerated overnight over the past half year. And suddenly there's new legislation, and the plastics industry starts to communicate that it is the consumers that need to take responsibility for it. Whereas you could argue that if they would have started with product stewardship upstream initiatives, building their reputation there and incentivizing the market to take responsibility, they would be in a better place now. So that is one observation. Another observation is around concrete and cement and aluminium is that we see, and these are very basic studies, that they are investing more than the steel industry in their reputation. And the aluminum stewardship initiative is up and running for the past 1.5 years, and we are following behind that. Doesn't necessarily mean that we need to step on board with every initiative that we're doing. We need to be critical, we need to understand what we really require as an industry. But yeah, I could argue that we need to do a little bit more, and other materials, they recognize maybe more than we do that intermaterial competition is going to be big for the future.
Sure. One last question, if I might, Roger. We heard a lot, and Andreas Goss was making the case very passionately for the industry working together on these issues. Yeah. He did enumerate a number of challenges and a number of things that need to happen to really enable that, not least from a regulatory policy framework. But for you, would you agree with what he said? And how are you going to achieve, if that is the case, that these issues can't be addressed by individual companies? You need to work together. How best to do that?
Well, I would take the material first, start with the material, because if the material is seen as relevant, then the industry is relevant. Recognize 4 reputation drivers, the carbon intensity, the responsible supply chain, the circularity, and the will to use it, and to use it as a product to optimize society. And then from that, articulate what the steel industry is doing to improve on those 4 areas.
Right.
And there's huge opportunity and also requirement to work together, because the OECD guidelines for responsible sourcing tell you that you need to work together. So let's not hesitate to work together where it's possible, where it is absolutely no infringement of competitive law, and where we can build the reputation for our material and our industry.
So look for those possibilities and exploit them. Roger, thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking Roger very much. Thank you. And he talked about reputation and what stakeholders think of you. So I'm now delighted to welcome to join me for our second non-fireside chat, Anna Maria Kaczmarek, who is Manager for Chemicals, Water and Sustainability at EUROFER. And Anna Maria, segues very nicely on from what I was talking to Roger about, because you conducted a questionnaire to find out not just what your members think, but also what other stakeholders think about the priorities that you should have in relation to sustainability. Why did you do it? Why did you ask the question in the first place?
Hello, Jackie. Good afternoon, everyone. We needed to consult our stakeholders in order to establish the right priorities for the European steel industry and EUROFER. We realized that the stakeholders of EUROFER are different as opposed to those of the member companies. Our most important stakeholders, however, are the European institutions and our members. Thus, we wanted to know their position on the sustainability.
Okay, and what came out of this? What were the main messages?
Well, as probably it's easy to guess, different stakeholders have different priorities. And the majority of answers came from our members, but also based on the replies of all stakeholders, it became clear that our most important priority is to be a sustainable employer.
Okay, and other issues that they raised?
Indeed, there were quite a variety of issues that were raised by our stakeholders, and these include the use of steel in sustainable products, like windmills, but also in ultralight car bodies and packaging turn out to have a very high societal impact. We should promote that more.
And was there anything about these findings that surprised you? Anything you found you hadn't expected and have learned and it's changed your thinking?
Indeed, it was quite surprising for us to realize that NGOs and public mention employment as the most important issue, as you would rather expect them to focus on environmental performance, for instance. It was also surprising that academia mentioned employment to be the most important issue as well. We should have expected them to focus on innovation instead. The financial representatives from banks and financial institutions wanted the steel industry to be a responsible employer. They, however, did not mention the economic value of the industry as the most vital. This outcome, however, is probably due to the limited number of replies we have received from those stakeholder groups, so perhaps it is not fully representative.
Okay, and one last question, if I might. What are you going to do with all this? You now know more about how people see you, what they think is important. What do you do with that information? How will it influence your work?
Surely we would like to continue the good practices we have so far and keep good safety records. For the environmental impact, we need to focus on the breakthrough technologies like HYSARNA plus carbon capture storage and blast furnace plus carbon capture utilization, or as the already mentioned, hybrid. At some point in future, we will make steel out of scrap to even higher extent, but that would depend on the scrap availability. But in the meantime, there are other challenges to overcome, like management of the recycling inhibitors. We should try to keep our very high recycling rate at least at the same level. As a follow-up with all this information, we're going to produce a EUROFER sustainability report and a roadmap. After all, sustainability is the umbrella for all our endeavors regarding people, planet, and profit. And steel, as probably may not surprise you, is the backbone of society in Europe.
And on that note, will you join me in thanking Anna Maria very much? Thank you, to you. So we have discussed a number of issues related to actually all the words that are in the title of our President's debate, which we now move to. Working together, it has been emphasized again and again. Governments, Industry working together with itself and with other sectors. Competitiveness, crucial. Innovation, the social aspect, the sustainable employer, that striking finding, and that broader question of sustainability. We're going to try in this last session of the day to bring all of that together. And I am delighted to welcome Jyrki Katainen, European Commission Vice President for Jobs, Growth, Investment and Competitiveness. Please do come and join me, Mr. Vice President. And thank you so much for being with us. I know you can't stay long. We have you for 30, 35 minutes. I'm going to try and make the most of that. Joining us shortly, but I think I was told just around the corner, but I don't see him. Now not just around the corner. Jerzy Buzek MEP, Chair of the Parliament's Committee on Industry, Research and Energy. Hopefully he will make it, but we will continue anyway because time is tight and I want to take advantage of having you here. Luis Colunga, Deputy Secretary General at the Industrial European Trade Union. A very warm welcome to you. Make yourself comfortable. And Geert, please do come back and join me here. Okay. So, we have focused up until now on low-carbon innovation, on sustainability, and a number of questions have come up in relation to that. But I want to also broaden our discussion now to the broader challenges and opportunities facing the sector. These key trends, we haven't yet mentioned Industry 4.0, automation, digitalization, all these trends, we've talked a lot about transformation. They are transforming industries across the economy. What do you believe, Mr. Vice President, what are the most important issues we need to address to ensure that this sector, which we've heard an immense amount about the capability for innovation and the work that's being done, but that it can be competitive, innovative, social and sustainable, all the words in that title of our debate. What are the issues we need to address?
Well, actually, first answer to this question is quite boring but still relevant. I believe that innovation is #1 priority. So without innovations, no industry can survive in the current competition. So innovation, I believe, the most. The second thing is affordable energy. So energy plays a crucial role, especially in steel industry, and we have to make sure that we have well-functioning energy market in Europe, which also makes sure that clean energy is available for affordable price. Two other issues which I combine in my first reflection is the circular economy and artificial intelligence. Those are the two main megatrends in the world market, I believe. So it has an impact to industry, steel industry too. And final point is to make sure that we can protect fair trade. Trade is this industry knows it better than anyone else, that trade can be fair or unfair. And EU's role here is to make sure that it's as fair and as possible.
And you talked yesterday when the EU was announcing its retaliatory measures about the importance of defending the industry, defending its interests, but in a measured way, because you said, as you said, there will be no winners from non-fair trade. But we also heard from Geert at the beginning, and I'll ask him just to reiterate the headlines of what he said in terms of those challenges, the importance of that level playing field and concerns. And we talked with our captains of industry earlier about it's not just creating the right environment to innovate, but it's keeping that innovation in Europe, keeping the jobs and growth in Europe. Question there, what is the challenge? Luis, from your perspective, the most important issues we need to address to enable the sector to play the role that we've heard it can play?
Well, I'm representing the trade union, and my opinion, you can imagine that it's different in some aspects. It's true that
can you hold the mic up to your
innovation is the first topic. I listened to your question about digitalization, automation. I think the steel industry is working many years ago about automation, digitalization. It's true that circular economy is important in the future, but concerning the future of the social aspect, I think in the future we need to discuss about the position of the policymaker. For example, I'm talking about the future of the steel industry now is changing. There are two big operations currently is the acquisition of Ilva by ArcelorMittal, the joint venture Tata Steel ThyssenKrupp will change more or less the map of the European industry, and we have a bad experience in the past, in the recent past, concerning the discussion. You say, what the challenge of the future? We need to talk about the social Europe, about the social aspect, and we need to change in the future. It's the opinion of Industriol, but it's a surprise for us. That is the opinion of Angela Merkel yesterday. We need to change all the rules concerning the competition, because we think we are playing now in a global market. It's true that the trade defense instrument is very big, and the new anti-dumping methodology is very nice, but we are playing in the global market. We are not playing only in Europe, and we need to think in this global market. And we are not involved only in the European market. The rules are important. You have a big role in the future, after the next election. And also we are talking about, is important, the economy, the sustainable economy. The ETS is very important, but we need to talk about the affordable goals. Because now I have an opinion, Industrial has an opinion concerning the discussion before. We are talking about new technologies, emission or production of steel without emission of CO2, but sometimes we think we are very optimistic. And at the end we are talking about project, but very difficult to pass to the big scale. And
as we were hearing in our debate previously.
Important for us to think that we need to be realistic in the future. It's important, ETS reform, but we need to do a just transition to this new system of production of steel. There are a lot of things that is true. Also, the energy is important, the energy affordable. Yeah. But to be honest, and I finish now, the clean energy package is not very focused on the needs of the industry. We are talking about energy efficiency to the citizens, but we need to be more focused on the needs of the industry.
Okay. So we're hearing there and talking about the key drivers of that competitiveness in this global marketplace. Geert, from your point of view, and you painted quite a stark picture at the beginning of the challenges you saw in terms of not undermining the competitiveness. One thing Geert said in his opening of this conference was, you can only spend every euro once. And if you're spending it on environmental issues and so on, others will be spending it on research and investment and how to maintain those level of investments. You also talked about the investment challenge. What for you are the most important issues that need to be addressed by the policymakers to drive that competitiveness and keep the innovation in Europe?
Yeah, well, I think there are two important topics. Vice President Katainen had already mentioned one. This is a level playing field. Yeah. But there is one which is maybe even more important, that is industry-friendly Europe. And I think in the State of the Union of the actual Commission, President Juncker had foreseen to grow the industry from, I think, 16% to 22% of GDP. Because we have seen after the crisis that the countries that had a good industry were much more robust against down cycles. So, and it is a bit frightening to see that in a lot of elections, a lot of countries, that voices start to pop up. Shouldn't we only be in a research Europe? Shouldn't we be a service provider? Do we really want to have industry? And this is a very dangerous thing, because when you talk about innovation and R&D, who pays the biggest funds of R&D? It is the industry. So when you would lose your industry, you would lose your research. When you lose your research, you lose your innovation, you're in a downward spiral. So I think it's very important that all the policymakers make this clear. Research is not standing as such. Research has always a goal. There is no research department of any industry in Europe when the industry is not in Europe. So an industry-friendly environment. And when you go to the steel industry specifically, the steel industry in Europe had a very specific profile. We have no raw materials in Europe, so we have a bit of scrap, but we sell it to Turkey, so we have no raw materials. From the coal and steel union in the past, there is only a bit coal left in the east, but it is shrinking very fast, so we have no raw materials. Secondly, we have very high energy costs. Yeah. And when you take a look, we cannot solve the raw materials, but the energy cost, when you take a look in the energy cost, you find out that, for example, in electricity, the cost of the electron in the US is not so different than the electron in Europe. But when you take a look at the total electricity cost in Europe, you get taxes, you get the grid, you get all kinds of focus. So energy cost. And the third driver is the labor cost, which is also high in Europe, which we managed until now to compensate by higher productivity due to innovation, due to R&D, and we see that the plants in Europe have a high productivity and despite labor costs are being competitive. But the energy cost is key. Raw materials we don't have, so it has to be done by innovation and the level playing field.
Thank you. And you addressed that point about affordable energy, Mr. Vice President, but this industry-friendly Europe that Geert talks about, the Commission had set this goal of increasing industry share of GDP. It's been an uphill struggle. It has not been easy. What do you think needs to be done now if we are broadly to achieve that objective and specifically for this sector address some of the issues which we have heard concerns about innovation leaving Europe if we don't?
I fully share the view of my two colleagues that we need robust industry in order to make our innovations flowing. Because even, I mean, in the best countries where the share of R&D expenditure per GDP is the highest, there the public sector's role is like 25%. So the rest comes from the industry. So this shows very clearly that we need to maintain the competence of the industry because it's the source of innovation. So this is one thing. What the EU can do in this front, we can do quite a bit. The first one is to provide financing to research and innovations. By the way, today we published our next Horizon Europe proposal, which is quite sizable, 100 billion for next 7 years. It's significantly increased comparing Horizon 2020. This is just one thing. This will not solve all the problems, but it's partially a solution. Then we have to look at the internal market aspects. For instance, circular economy, it's not only environmental project, but it's also, at least as I understand it, it's an internal market project mostly, because our aim is to create new market for new products and new services and new business models. This is one example of internal market what must be further developed. And then we have existing projects like Energy Market Union. It's not completed yet. So it will take quite some time to create better energy market Europe. We have some good examples. For instance, in Nordic countries, there is Nord Pool, which is a good attempt to create a unified, integrated energy market, and the same model should be copied elsewhere too. It takes some time because there is a need for interconnectors and transmission lines, etc. But those are, I mean, there is no silver bullet, but the measures are rather structural. Also, maybe final point I want to make is that because the world around us is changing all the time, our member states must do their share to improve competitiveness, whether it's skills policy or labor market productivity policies or things like that.
I want to come back on that skills point, but just in terms of, starting with your first point about money and Horizon Europe, the renamed Horizon 2020, and the 100 billion. Which of course will have to be shared out, and there will be a battle royal for which sectors get what. But here is a question I had asked our captains of industry earlier as well. In terms of, you talked at the beginning about these huge sums of investment that are needed. Where do you think the public money, the EU money, can make the biggest difference? Where would you like to see it focus? Same question to you, Luis.
So I think the public money should be put there where there is no direct economical reason to invest.
So the business case is not there yet?
The business case is not there, because when the business case is there, business case will happen. And one of the things what we see is when we talk about low carbon industry, is that the speed in which the EU is asking to improve, for example, the CO2 output, the CO2 emissions, is not feasible with normal technology. So, and then you have to be careful, because when you say affordable energy, but you have also say affordable legislation. Because when you put the legislation in place, which is impossible to follow, you're just starting to shrink your industry. So you can have very ambitious legislation, we are used to this is not a problem, but there you can help with public funding to assure that the industry can follow this legislation, which they might not do without public money and deciding to produce somewhere else and import it.
Yeah. Luis.
Yes, but I think that you addressed the question to me and Gert, and talking about public money, I think you need to address the question to the Vice President, because at the end, it's one of the responsible of the European policy.
They will decide where it goes. I'm saying, what do you think it should go for?
No, but we are, in industrial, we are talking about the need to invest, but it's not only public money. We signed a letter with EUROFER concerning the FP9, the new funds, but it's the reason. Who legislate is the policy maker, is the European Commission. We have some goals, very, very clear, but we need help. And I say we need because we are talking now on the side of the companies, because we have the same interest, the companies and the workers. But it's not only, it's very difficult for the companies to reach enough money to invest. I remember our meeting with the high-level group on energy that two commissioners, Mrs. Biankowska and Šefčovič, were, and we talked from the union side about the needs to investment, need the support, need public money. And when we finished the meeting, the one director said, Luis, you are like Margaret Thatcher, always talking about money. Yes, because now is what we need, because we are playing now with the future of the steel sector, and we need the support about the policymaker, about the European Commission. It's not only economic support. I think the guy from Salgitter talked before about it. It's not only talking about research development, only about money, but it's support, politician support for the European industry. But we are talking about economic support, but all kinds of support. And we need investment not only from the public sector. We need investment also in the companies, because now one big problem in Europe, I'm sorry, but one big problem is the lack of investment in some companies, not in all the companies.
But that is something that European Fund for Strategic Investments was precisely set up to do, to have that leveraging effect. Two questions. One, in terms of where you think the resource, whether it be in the research and innovation budget, whether it be the European Fund for Strategic Investments or elsewhere, where do you think EU money can help deliver maximum bang for bucks, if I could use that expression? And can you come back on this point about not just affordable energy, but affordable legislation? A real concern that we're hearing about that it isn't affordable and that it will drive the innovation out of Europe. And then before we lose you, I'm going to see if there are any questions for you from the audience.
Thank you. It's difficult to mention 2 or 3 areas where EU money should go when talking about investments, because I believe that it's about the consumers and market to decide where to invest in. I believe that ultimately we need more investment for digital technologies and artificial intelligence, because it will reshape the market and our societies. We are lagging badly behind our competitors on AI, private AI investments. The second thing is that we need new business models which uses circularity as a enabler, and thus I believe that if looking at the next Horizon Europe budget, big chunk of the money will be directed to AI and circular economy. Legislation, well, this is what the Commission tries to do, replace 28 different laws, national laws, by one European law. But the question, of course, in this front is that what is right thing to regulate and what is the area where we don't need regulation. Luis actually mentioned one interesting thing, which I don't know what to think about. But this comes up to me every once in a while from different sources, including industry, that we should revise our competition legislation. this is usually linked to the need to create European champions. And my question, if I'm allowed to ask from Gert, is that what do you think about European champions? Do we need, if yes, who should do it? Does government play any role or what? Because this is an issue which I don't really cannot put in any order.
Just so you know, and Gert, I will allow you to respond, but I want to bring Jerzy Buzek in a moment. But there was also an issue when you talk about, we talked about the need for this sector to work, companies to work together. And it was said by one of our captains of industry, we're not used to doing it, but we have to do it if we are going to meet the low carbon innovation challenge. But there's a problem. I can't meet with my colleague from another company unless I've got a third person present. Probably needs to be a compliance officer. Working together to tackle common challenges comes into other regulatory challenges. I just throw that in because it's another issue that's come up, but I am delighted to welcome, and I will give you a chance to respond, but I do want to bring in Jerzy Buzek, who, as you all know, is the chair of the Parliament's Industry, Research and Energy Committee. A very warm welcome. Thank you for making it. We have been talking about the drivers of competitiveness and the goal of an industry-friendly Europe. And how there's been question marks. We've talked about affordable energy being a central point, but we've also talked about affordable legislation being a point. How do we drive innovation in Europe, and then how do we keep it in Europe? Your thoughts in terms of the steel sector and what you believe are the key elements of enabling environment. We heard a lot about how they are innovating, but how they need breakthrough technologies that will require a lot of money. What do you see as the challenges ahead?
Well, a lot of them in front of us, certainly, but it's not quite a new situation in the history. Well, good afternoon to all of you. I'm straightforward from Munich. It was not easy to get to Brussels because sometimes it's, well, some delay, as you know very well. We've got discussion between three very important gentlemen and also institutions, because trade union and steel association, industrialization, of course our executive, you've got all of them together. European Parliament and we think that, of course, you asked drivers. Okay, we can help a lot thanks to our legislation. But all the possibilities are in the hands of industry and, of course, workforces. And we know very well about that. What to do to be useful for both of them? I think Vice President of the European Commission answered some questions, but let me say, we know very well that we wouldn't like to stop our competitiveness. And if we take into account the result of Paris Agreement, and on the other hand, if we know that steel industry has reached its technological limits from point of view of CO2 emission, and on the other hand, we do not see clear technological alternative, breakthrough technologies. I've heard of some of them. They said maybe 12 years, maybe 15, depends from one university or institute to another. But I also received the answer, no. Real, true technologies we will not see in the next 30 years. It's killing, could be killing for steel production, and we should know that strategic product, let's say for next 20 years, is coking coal, which is very, very difficult to achieve in Europe, almost 40 million tons per year from 5 or 6 countries all over the year. Only one producer, true and real producer in next 4 or 5 years. So it could be very dangerous from this point of view. So let us think about very important issue, take into account, and I think it is absolutely necessary. We cannot allow and accept any free ride at expense of European industry, because it would be also killing for our Paris goal, because we need effective economy if we want to achieve Paris goals. So innovation is only one answer, and we cannot find any other. It could help our workforce, our modernization and reindustrialization of Europe, and both European Commission and European Parliament, we take care about that. And almost 100 billion euro for new program, for research, for innovation, for development. It's very important. On the other hand, we should take care on social impact, and we've got more or less 40 regions in Europe which are, let's say, coal dependent.
Yeah, I want to come back to that social question in a moment.
In this transition, we need to spend money. If I may say something, maybe Mr. Vice President can answer that. We need a few billion euro for 41 regions in Europe with steel industry, core industry, all of them together. And we should rebuild technology and industry in these regions. As far as I know, it is less than 1 billion. Is it true, Mr. Vice President?
I'll give him a chance to answer.
5 billion or 7 billion.
Okay.
That it will be great also for our workforce.
I'll give you a chance to answer. Very quickly, Geert, on the
Sorry
question.
to have such a question, Mr. President.
I will. What I'm going to do is, Geert, if you could answer the Vice President's question briefly about European champions, I will then throw it open, because we're going to lose the Vice President in a minute, to see if there are any burning questions to him, and then I'll give you a chance to respond. Do we need European champions?
Yes.
Because?
So, look, I think you have to see in what sector you are and what is the environment. So when you are, as the steel industry now, it was not the case 20 years ago. When you're acting globally, what is happening, you see that your customers are merging, your customers are coming a fewer number. Look at the automotive companies. There are maybe a handful of automotive global companies that are becoming all global. And your main suppliers, the raw material suppliers, are global. Also a handful of companies. This is the first problem. Second, with the digitalization, what you see is that everything goes faster. The data is much more available, the technology goes faster, the customers are more demanding, the quality demands go faster. So we have never developed faster new steels than today. So when you have a customer which is globalized, focused on speed, and you have an industry which is not robust against this, that you cannot absorb shocks, you will not survive. And the problem is, because before you have a global champion or a European champion, you have to start to cooperating. And one of the problems we have, as we discussed already today, that the cartel legislation in Europe
what I mentioned earlier.
is not fitted for this. So I think we have discussed with some politicians already, we should review the cartel legislation in the light of the global environment we are in.
Okay, thank you. I will come to the social question, and Luis, I know you will want to come in on that. And social justice is very much part of the title of this session. But before I do, if we could have any questions, particularly to the Vice President, but anyone else? All right, Charles, I like to move around, so I'll do it. And please be very brief, because we've only got the Vice President for 5 more minutes.
Yeah, Mr. Kaitan, very thanks, great you're here. Just take advantage of that. I just want to make the connection between the day we have the launch of the European Horizon Europe and the discussion you have and the actual policy you have to deliver. We are here as European steel industry, the technology leaders in the world. And that's what we want to stay. And for that reason, the policy will have to be developed. We have now one stone today built up. What we understand, there will be in November this year, you will have to make a kind of a new industrial policy. It will be the 250 roadmap. And what we see in the preparation is that it's not done in the way you are discussing it here. It's discussed again on CO2 only, circular economy only, not even there, and not the international trade aspects. So my question to you is that to really make the steel industry be able to keep the leadership, that this policy in November, the plan, will that indeed in addition to the 250 CO2 roadmap, include plans for the measures for effective global level playing field for CO2, and mix it with CO2 so we don't put emissions in the air for materials which are not circular.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Any other burning? I can take one more if there is one. Okay, let's come back because there are a question from here about the social impact and those regions that Jerzy Buzek was talking about, and your new industrial plan and the challenges they see it. Mr. Vice President.
I would like to start with the new industrial plan. I'm not quite sure what do you mean the new industrial plan by... Okay, yes, but I'm co-chairing together with Elżbieta Bienkowska Future of Industry working group, and it has a timetable which is slightly different. It should come up with, or we should come up with the report on sometimes next spring, and it's done just like this. We have a group of people who are discussing the future of European industry, and it's supposed to concentrate on big enough issues which would give opportunity for the new commission to draw conclusions. So we have resisted against the wish of many industries the attempt to create sectoral industrial programs, because we don't believe in that. We have had different industrial programs for different industries in the past, but there are many issues and challenges which are common for all the industries, like artificial intelligence, digitalization, more generally speaking, circularity, etc. So this commission has wanted to look at industry as one entity which has different wings, but still lots of common. Also, trade policy belongs to this. So I have high expectations on our work on the future of industry, because there are lots of good people from the labor union side, from industrial side, from smaller companies, from financial sector, and we try to find a kind of a common vision for next 15 years ahead. So this is what I concentrate heavily on. Then
the social question.
Yes, another question on coal-dominated regions, and Jerzy, our respective member of parliament, former prime minister, asked, and I got your point. We still have a lot of regions which are dependent on coal mining and coal business, and we need to help those regions to find new path forward. So that's why the structural funds, but also new Invest EU fund, which is a novelty in this MFF, are very important. So I'm in charge of the latter one, the Invest EU fund. It's supposed to provide financing for instance, transition regions who are willing to reshape their business models and reshape and update their industrial basis. So if we manage to lose or decrease the amount of coal in Europe, it gives more room for industry to be more flexible with rules.
You wanted to come back.
One sentence. I only want to add that if we've got coal regions, is very often united together with steel industries. That's very important from point of view of our discussion, but thank you for your answer.
Thank you, and I will give you a chance, Luis, also to talk about that social impact question in a moment, but before we lose you, Mr. Vice President, I did promise to get you out on time. Just in terms of priorities for the future, and some of our captains of industry talked earlier about what they would do if they were European Commissioner for a day, so in your shoes, if they switched hats. If you had to identify one thing you would like to see from the sector in order to deliver, and I go back to the title of our debate, a sector that is competitive, innovative, social, and sustainable, what would your priority for them be, and your personal priority of all the issues we've talked about as we move towards the end of this legislative cycle, and as you say, prepare for the future?
Education and skills. So I'm passionate with this topic, and now I'm not only talking about reskilling existing workers, which is also equally important. We have to find new business models to provide adult education for people who are already at work. This is utmost important. It's underdeveloped in Europe, but the challenges which we are going to face will challenge this structure. But I'm also talking about the quality of basic education. If you look at the differences between our member states on quality of education, they are enormous. It's only because of cultural reasons, because of historical reasons, but also because education has not been #1 priority, not even #5 priority for many of our governments. And this must stop now. This must simply change now. We are heading towards more open world, which is a positive thing. We are heading towards the world where artificial intelligence will even further open the world. It will reshape the way we work. It will reshape the way we provide services, etc. So in order to strengthen the resilience of our societies and individuals, we have to pay attention much more than what we have done in the previous years to the quality of education. And there, one segment to which I put all my efforts would be the quality of teachers' training.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking the Vice President very much, because I know you have to run away. So thank you very much. And Luis, if I could come to you to pick up on both of those points. We're talking here about a transformation that has enormous social impacts and what we need to do in order to ensure that we mitigate those impacts, that we do achieve this transformation in a socially fair way. And we're talking about the workers of today. He's talked about basic education for the future, but also the skilling and the reskilling in light of these changes that we're talking about. How do you see the priority ahead and how they, the policymakers, can really make a difference?
Yes, we are agree that education is one of the priorities. We are talking about the skilling, upskilling, reskilling. Now our experience is that in the steel sector, perhaps is now the state, the government, are letting the responsibility to the companies, because at the end we have a big problem in the labor market to find workers now with the new right skills we need. And I think this is a big work that need to do the politician at national level and local level, because there are a big gap between the needs of the industry and the offer from the university, from the professional schools is right. But when we are talking about social, we are not talking about the needs of the companies, because well, it's not here the vice president, but we complain about the social dialogue now in Europe, not the social dialogue with the companies, because it's like always there are different companies, there are good, bad moments, but now we are complaining about the position, for example, of the situation about the European Directive of Information and Consultation. We think that in the European Commission there are some commissioners that the information and consultation process is not important. And for us, it's very important the opinion of the workers in all the process. This is social. It's not only talking about education. It's important for us. I talked before about the just transition, and it's true that the industry is changing and the steel is changing, and we are talking about the future of the steel production, and we need to do a just transition. It's not only to let the workers without work. We are not talking only reskilling the worker. We are talking about anticipation of change. And the education, we need anticipation of skills, and we need to think in the future of the industry with anticipation, not thinking in the shorter future. This is important. Education, but also social dialogue. And for this reason, we talked about, for example, the competition rules. Why? Because they are thinking only in the small and medium enterprises, in the customer, but are not thinking in the workers, are not thinking in the companies.
Okay. I'll come to Geert, and then I'll come to you afterwards, Mr. Buzek, if I might. But Geert, just to give us a sense from your members of the debate around the social challenges posed by this transformation and this question of skilling and reskilling and that passion that we heard there from the Vice President for Education. There is the long term, the basic education, but also in this skills area. How bad is the mismatch at the moment between what you need and what you've got?
Well, I think one of the key problems is that in Europe, people will have to work longer. And you see it in all countries that the working time is prolonging. This is demographically consequence. Now, when you work longer, we have to change the work. Because people, some of the jobs that people were doing in the past, you cannot do until you're 65 or 67. So the first thing starts by how do we get people longer at work? And this is already a high need for reskilling, reschooling, education, changing, flexibility to do this. We are not at all there. And there we see that the governments are making those slogans, but there is not a lot of movement in this direction. So until now, it is still easier to take care of a social net. And this is then again a problem for the budget and for the cost, but this is the key topic. Once we do this, you can solve a lot of things because you will be forced to reskill, you will be forced to change your jobs, and then you will have an answer on how you will keep those people at work, and you have the digitalization tools to get this done.
Jerzy Buzek, you talked about the social impact and you talked about the regions most affected, but in terms of the individuals most affected and how we make this, to put it Luis's way, socially just and how we deal with these skills. I mean, I've lost count of how many debates I've moderated about the skills mismatch and the number of initiatives there have been, but we still don't seem to quite have cracked it. What do you see as the challenge ahead?
So let me say, it could be very important growing generation gap in the case of workforces in steel industry. In my country, more than 50% of workers in steel industry are above 50 years old, more than 50%. And if we say that maybe in the industry 4.0, we will not lose the jobs. So it's slightly different than with the automation, probably. But we need new skills. So your right answer is education, training, of course. But I think on adaptation, because if we say maybe 65 years, 67 years, still in work, still active, but for such a workers, it's very difficult to change their skills. So its generation gap is something quite new, especially in such a type of industry. So we should think about that very, very seriously, and how to make it attractive for young generation. Well, unfortunately, I don't have answer, but it's the most important question to all of us. And let me say, because, well, now I can say something on behalf of both of us.
Absolutely.
Because we cooperate very closely. And as a matter of fact, with Vice President, industrial initiatives and so on. So we are very close, thinking about the same issue. So we can propose as politicians, propose a strategy program like Digital Europe program by European Commission, 9 billion euro next years, and also tremendous program because Vice President didn't say the name, investing in a smart, innovative and sustainable industry, a renewed EU industrial policy strategy. I'm very sorry to say to representative of trade union and also association, it would be necessary also for you to read it. Of course, you know, because it's just a vision how it could look like in the future. Maybe it is very difficult to predict the future, but on the other hand, is a lot of advisors, advisory board, and so on, so on. It was a long discussion how to propose such a program. We can propose program, strategy, invest money, and money. So you should push us and help us in that. Your governments as well, because it's very important. We need programs in the European scale, which is always better. Joint technological initiative, for example. Joint technological initiative, industry, research, responsibility of local governments, and so on, so on. And of course, circular economy, circularity of steel, everything could help us. But in general, if you ask of the problem of, let's say, generally speaking, workers or workforces, it's very important that you make this, way of working in the future very attractive for young people. Now, as I can find, even in my region, which is very industrial, with steel industry, coal industry, it's not very attractive. They prefer something else than to go to the old-fashioned industry. We should change this approach absolutely fundamentally if we want to win.
So we have an image challenge as much as anything else, but we are almost at the end of our time. And I want to pick up on where you talked about the vision and what it could look like for each of you. And it's really the same question that I asked to the Vice President before he left. And I will come to Luis first, then to Mr. Buzek, and then I will give you the final word. If you had to identify, Luis, one priority for yourself as an industry, as representing workers in this industry, one thing the industry needs to do in order to ensure that it is, and you can put the emphasis on whichever of these words you like, competitive, innovative, social, sustainable. One piece of homework, if you like, for you as an industry, and one request of all the things we've talked about from the policymakers, what would it be? Same to you, Mr. Buzek. What do you need from these guys? What do you want from them in order to make that vision come true? And what is your personal priority as a policymaker? And I'll give Gert the last word. Luis first.
One thing is impossible. There are many things that the industry needs. I think a real industrial policy in Europe is not only words, action, because Gert talked before and talked about the politician, blah, 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 but we need concrete action and talk about the importance of the industry, but really talk it. Yeah? Really talk that the industry is the backbone of Europe, I think, is the first. Second, we need to think in the future to change some laws, not only competition law, some laws, to give the industry, or to give the possibility the industry to be sustainable and to have a future in Europe. For example, one thing that we need to talk now is about the foreign direct investment and the owner of the industry in Europe, because I think Mr. Katainen let us, but he asked us about European champions, because he is thinking now with the position in other owner of the industry from out of Europe. Well, but at the end, is the Commission have to believe in the industry, but really believe in the industry. Not only words, is a really behavior to improve the industry in Europe and to guarantee the industry in the future, because now it's not very clear the position of the European Commission.
So really deliver on an industry-friendly Europe. Mr. Buzek.
As a matter of fact, Madam, we answered all the issues you can expect in our last word, because we discussed all the issues. For me, absolutely fundamental in all the adjectives you used, to be competitive, competitiveness, social, sustainable, we can help by one way only, to be innovative. Because it will be better for competitiveness, will be better for sustainability, of course, and also for social issue as well. So it's only one answer. And it is absolutely necessary that the member states will understand such a question in the more global scale.
Yeah.
Because everything is global. Also our coke production and import is absolutely global. Steel industry, we can import from India, United States from Europe, hopefully, let me say. And so from this point of view, we should play as global player, not each member state separately. What we expect, European institutions, that you will help us, trade unions and industrial association, to maybe encourage or enforce member states to play more European game, because it will be fruitful for all of us, because all the projects, programs which we can create in the European scale will be much more effective. We can avoid duplication, for example, the same research, the same way to achieve our competitiveness. So from many, many points of view, because it was a national champions, we need European champions. They will be also national champions as well, because we can play in the European scale. So if you could help us, European institution, to write the strategies for Europe and to give your advices for such a strategic approach, it will be very, very fruitful. And the most important, of course, in each point is innovation, and to be innovative in our economy, and it will be
which, as you say,
easier.
Drives everything else. So a plea there, put some pressure on your member states, get them behind this to turn the vision into a reality. Without the member states, it won't happen, I think is what he's saying. Geert, you have the last word.
Jackie, so yeah, what policymakers could do, I think we discussed it several times. There are two things. Level playing field. This is absolutely needed in all areas, because we are in a global industry, otherwise we are out. Secondly, industry-friendly environment. In the broadest way, can be energy, can be CO2, can be whatever it is, but friendly industry. Now, what we can do, this is very simple. We are still very much seen as old economy.
Yeah.
We are working in an industry which produces the most beautiful material of the world. Steel is everywhere. There's steel. You see steel in the chairs. There's everything. In the wall, in the roof, in your watch. There is everywhere steel. So I think we are still not meeting this objective that the policymakers, the politicians, the people in the street just understand what is steel about. It is just too much taken for granted. Steel is not falling from the sky. So it has to be made, and it is top product with a huge innovation, huge R&D. The budgets and the research we are doing is tremendous compared to other sectors. It is just not known. So we are good, but it's not known. So I think we have to put real effort in this, and there's a big role for EUROFER there and for all the companies, that steel has to be more at the top of the level of the agendas of the people, and understanding better, instead of old economy and a lot of emissions, what is steel about? It is really the product of the future. And it has to be clear in the minds of the people. They have to be proud that they can produce steel in Europe.
So very much echoing that reputational image issue that we've talked about all the way through. And on that uplifting and positive note, ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking all our panel very much indeed. Mr. Boozer, thank you so much for making the effort and struggling against air traffic control and all of that to join us from Munich. That brings us to the end of the formalities of European Steel Day. Now comes the fun part. I do hope you will be able to stay. Drinks and food will be served outside immediately. So thank you all very much for being here, for taking part in our discussions, and I wish you a very enjoyable end of European Steel Day. Drinks are served.